Welcome back. You've tuned in again to One-on-One. And today, we do have a very interesting guest. And we're going to address what you've heard me say so many times. If we do not teach the children of today about their yesterday, we're going to steal a little bit of their tomorrow. There are many people out there whose passion it is to bring the past to the future, to the present. Today's guest dedicates his life to doing just that. My name is Vin Dacquino. Our guest is Peter Feinman, CEO, President of IHARE. Peter, what is IHARE? Talk to us about your passion and your peeves. I know that there are some things that rile your skin, Peter. Talk to us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
First, thank you very much for inviting me back to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I have an interest in local and state history. And let me give you a simple example. Suppose you woke up one morning, which is probably how you begin your day usually.
Yeah.
And you're at a Marriott.
Okay.
You're by the interstate. And you go to Starbucks to get some coffee.
Okay.
Where are you?
Just about anywhere, maybe Fishkill.
You could be almost anywhere.
You're
except for the fact that I said interstate, which is a clue to that you're in the United States.
Right.
You could be almost anywhere.
Yeah, Starbucks are just about everywhere.
So then how do you know where you are?
It's an interesting question, Peter.
And the phrase we use a lot to describe this is your sense of place, your sense of belonging, your sense of being part of a community. But if your community is the world through the internet,
oh yeah,
through the devices you have hooked up to your ear, then where do you really belong? Part of what makes local history so important is it gives you, and you remember this show from back in the 70s, Roots, which they just remade into a TV series. What are your roots? Where do you belong? And without those roots, it's hard to develop your dreams.
Yeah, and
they
a
have
lot
to be
of those
based
roots,
on
those roots have a direct influence on who we are today.
Exactly. It's like growing up in the womb or growing up in a healthy environment that nurtures you and prepares you for later in life. And when you take that away, what do you have left? You have the internet. So if a tree falls in the woods and it's not on YouTube, has anything happened? Has anything happened then? If you're not part of that World Wide Web, then what are you? And the answer is most of your life is not lived on the web. Most of your life is lived in the real world where you actually physically are.
So you bring that real world to people? Is that what you do?
Want to connect you to that world. Now, you and I did that several times when you participated in programs I ran on local history, on the American Revolution, particularly Sybil Ludington.
Yeah, we've been in colleges, and we've been in restaurants, on boats.
Right.
West Point. We've been everywhere.
She is part of Putnam history.
Yeah.
And actually Dutchess history, because at that time, as we know, there was no Putnam County.
Right.
You just celebrated the bicentennial a few years ago. But that is part of the story of this community. And when you're here and driving by certain statues, as you once did yourself, and going, who is that statue? Why is that person here?
If that statue had not been there, and if those signs had not been there, I would have no idea. Sybil Ludington would absolutely be dead.
Right. Otherwise, you could just be a person driving on Route 9 or Route 22,
no idea
going
what
by one
there
shopping mall after another, and you don't know what community you're in unless you happen to see a sign behind a telephone pole that says you're now entering this village or this town.
So, Peter, you spend a great deal of time reaching out to the public. I know that you had a wonderful program for teachers where you actually took teachers to the sites. And I know that's something you very much believe in. For years, we've taught children history in classrooms with textbooks.
Right.
But you're one of those people who say, no, you need to be where they were. And you've taken people to forts, you've taken people to islands, you've taken people to all sorts of things. When did this passion begin for you?
It began really with my father.
Really?
When I was growing up. And on our vacations, he would take the family, my sisters, my mother, father, load up the station wagon, and we would drive up and down the East Coast.
Wow.
And we would visit sites. And this is before chainification, where you can sit down at home on your computer and make reservations.
Yeah, really. You can be anywhere in the world from your desk.
Where are we going? Where am I going to stay with my family?
Yeah.
In the middle of nowhere when there's no interstate. They're just local roads I'm taking. How am I going to get there? This is when you really needed AAA
yeah.
To help navigate the route. You couldn't just do it on...
And you didn't have a GPS to do it either.
You didn't have any of these things. But we went to a lot of places, from upstate New York down probably to Charleston.
So the love of history was instilled at a young age in you.
Definitely from a young age. And we'd buy copies of the Declaration of Independence when you're in Philadelphia, and the Gettysburg Address, and all these other things. So we were visiting a lot of sites when there weren't a lot of tourists.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big thing to do back then. Yeah. So that's where it really came from. It came from my father, came from these family vacations we had as a child, and I got my interest in history from that.
Yeah, that's why I absolutely applaud the Daughters of the American Revolution. DAR helped to put up signs along many of these historic sites. And I urge families from Hopac and all of Putnam County to be aware of all these wonderful yellow and blue signs that were actually put there from the Department of Education in like the 30s. And these people can follow these signs. And more recently, there was a young man, a Boy Scout, who put up the signs for Sybil so that people could follow, in a sense, her route. In truth, they can't follow her exact route because all of the things that were there before are gone. I mean, if they were to follow her exact route, they'd be going through reservoirs and backyards and living rooms. Just the world has changed.
Let me give you a perfect example of that, which gets to my peeves. There's a show on AMC called Turn about a real spy ring from the American Revolution. It's based in Setauket in Long Island and Suffolk. It's filmed in Virginia. The state legislator from Setauket held a meeting in Albany on May 29th, 2014. And he said, I can't believe that in my hometown it's being filmed in Virginia. Not only is it being filmed there, but who advertises on it? Virginia is for lovers, not New York. So here we are, AMC is saying, here's a TV audience of 1 million, 2 million, whatever people, about events that took place in the American Revolution in New York, where George Washington spent more time than in any other state. It's not only being filmed in Virginia, but Virginia is advertising its American Revolution story rather than New York saying, come to New York where it really happened. Yeah. Now this directly ties into Putnam and what you were just talking about.
Yeah,
because the action in this TV show is now at the point, this is a spoiler alert in case you haven't known it, but Benedict Arnold becomes a traitor. I hope I'm not giving anything away there. And John Andre is caught and then hanged. Where does this action take place? Well, Benedict Arnold lived here in Putnam County.
Yeah,
he lived in the Beverly Robinson
property.
House. Now, I went there with the teachers. The house isn't there anymore.
No.
All that was left were two things: a root cellar, and the owners allowed us on the properties, a couple from New York, and a sign, like the signs you were talking about.
Yeah.
And the signs also say, here is where he fled to make his escape.
I actually followed that path with Ali Pataki, who did a wonderful book called The Trader's Wife, and it was all about his wife and how she was involved. Very, very interesting and intriguing. And I actually followed that path right down to the
right to the water.
Yeah, to the river where
the teachers didn't want to do that.
No, yeah, really. It's a pretty winding road
now.
They
looked at the side.
Yeah, but it's
and there were also a lot of signs, as you say, where Andre was trying to escape and in the process be caught and then hang. So my point on this is, here is a national audience looking at events that in part took place in Putnam County.
Right.
What is Putnam County and what is New York doing, it took place in Hudson Valley, to use this opportunity, handed to it on a silver platter, to say, come here, come to Putnam, come to Rockland, come to Orange, come to the places where these events really occurred, and bring their tourist dollars, bring their families, and so on. We don't do that. So that's a peeve, because we are, and Virginia does. Virginia is advertising events that are taking place.
Virginia's for lovers, isn't that there?
That's their ad. Virginia's for lovers, but they say come here to Jamestown and Yorktown and all these. They say come. Why don't we need to advertise, market? Where is our historical and tourist apparatus to promote the history that took place here? And I mention that only because it just happened in June on the show Turn, and it made it very obvious. And this is giving you a preview of one of the posts I'm about to write about the situation here and how we're not really doing a good job.
Let's talk about that for a minute. You spend a great deal of time writing blogs and posts, historical blogs and posts.
Right.
You very generously send them to me so I have an opportunity to get an idea of what's happening or not happening, as the case may be.
And I appreciate that once every 3 months you actually read them.
Yeah,
I mean, that's nice.
I read the titles all the time.
Okay, because it's in the email address.
Well, the thing is, Peter, that you actually do spend a great deal of time writing these things. And some of the things I find not only interesting, but upsetting.
Right.
Because, as you say, it doesn't seem that New York is giving the attention it needs to our very own history. I mean, look how many years it took for Sybil to get recognized. Right. Now, fortunately, I did the Call to Arms in 2000. Up until that time, it was so hard to find information on her. She wasn't even recognized. I mean, more and more, she's getting recognized, but what a task it's been. It's 17 years now. And I can't get people to realize what she did and how important it is for Americans to fight for our freedom.
This ties into some things going on right now that you might be interested in. There is a new social studies guidelines that came out. It's the first update since, I think it was 1996 or 7, meaning the social studies curriculum didn't have 9/11, war in Iraq, Barack Obama, anything like that. The question I was raising is, what is the role of local history in that? Whether it's Sybil for right here in Putnam or the Erie Canal and things like that. How much do people learn about what's going on in their own neighborhoods?
Yeah.
A simple example might be, and you may hear about this later, is Then and Now, where you ask kids to take pictures of what something looks like now and compare it to what something from the archives, if they go to their historical society, what did it look like 100 years ago? And you can see, well, what changed? How did your community change in 100 years or 150 years or even 50 years?
Yeah.
What it looked like then, maybe when your parents or grandparents are growing up, to what it looks like now. And what does that tell you about how society changed? So what is that position in the curriculum? And we're looking right now to have a meeting, a statewide meeting in Utica College.
I know well. I grew up in Utica.
Oh, well, then maybe you want to
My
come.
hometown.
To bring together people from different parts of the history community, including the president of the New York State Council for Social Studies, who's from Rochester, talk about what's in the curriculum. What can teachers really do with local and state history, and not what are they allowed to do, but what do they actually do in practice? And how do we make sure that teachers know their local history
Yeah.
and that kids experience it? They just don't drive by a memorial, say to World War I, the centennial is coming up, 1918. 2018 will be the centennial of the end of World War I, and November 11th, Armistice Day. You drive by these monuments in every community.
Yeah.
You see names there
Oh,
that may be the
You can have
ancestors
statues all over the place.
of people who
never
live in
heard
the
of.
community today. Do these mean anything to you? And if they don't mean anything to you, then you could be living anywhere. What
Yeah.
makes you living in Cold Spring versus Carmel or
Yeah.
Putnam?
I mean, I've said it 100 times. The reason that I got into Sybil Ludington was I was on my way to work to go teach sixth graders, and sort of got held up on the corner, and I looked to my right, and there's this sign, and it said Sybil Ludington rode across this spot, 1777, to help fight the British with Colonel Ludington. I had no idea what the sign was talking about.
Right.
And if that were true, then she practically went through my backyard. Here I was a teacher, and I had no idea
Right.
anything about my local history until I went to the local library and realized that there's files there, vertical files that really hold information. Also,
You see, people in Putnam participated in the Civil War. You don't have to study the Civil War in the South. You can look at families here
yeah,
that either went to the South or tried to cope with the fact that the son, the father, the brother was not here to run the farm or whatever. How did they live? So you can study the Civil War here. You can study World War I here.
Yeah.
You can study immigration here. All these things in American history have a facet and component in your own backyard, as
Yeah.
you said with Sybil, if you make the effort.
right.
But if you don't make the effort, it's forgotten and it's gone.
People don't even realize that we have, in just this area, a village historian, a town historian, a county historian.
Okay. Well, now you've got another peeve.
Oh, here we
This
go.
is a big one. New York State, to its credit, requires every municipality to have an historian.
Yep.
So all 62 counties have one, in theory.
Theory.
All villages have one. All towns have one. All cities, we don't have a city here, have one. The law is not enforced. Many people don't. Many places don't have one. Even if you have one, what does it mean? What does the county historian have to do?
Do they have archives? Do they have files?
Here you go, a very simple example. Many county historians don't even get paid.
Right.
Those who get paid might only be part-time, like the Putnam County historian. Those who get paid might have other responsibilities besides the historian's job, usually archives. There's no clear-cut guidelines as to what you should do as the county historian. In fact, if you go to the meeting, or the village or the town, if you go to the annual conference of the State Association of Municipal Historians, they'll have a session there, like, what should you do? They don't know. There's no training for it.
What's
There's
the
no
title?
rules
Isn't there
for it.
a title for this?
The Association of Public Historians of New York State,
There you go.
AFNIS. You can go to that session, and they really will have a session. It's almost sometimes like one person I remember being picked out because she attended the village council meeting. So when the previous historian retired, they said, oh, how would you like to be the new historian? You come to all our meetings. Oh, okay. She was the band music teacher, which no preparation, no training. And then, furthermore, she had to go to the house of the historian to get the materials. Now, these are government records being held in someone's private home.
Wow.
And that happens in a lot more of the smaller communities, where there's not like what you have here in Brewster. You have a Putnam County.
So has a lot of our history been lost?
A lot of the history gets lost. Sometimes when the kids get the house after mom or dad dies, they just throw out this garbage because they say, well, that was her historian thing. She doesn't need it anymore.
Her passion,
it was
not
her
ours.
passion. She died now. We'll just throw it all out. Say, no,
Yeah.
those are owned by the village or the town. They're not yours to throw out.
Yeah.
So there are no real set rules to enforce that you really have one. There's no real set guidelines to what to do if you really are one. And these kinds of things happen.
Yeah. And it's very, very hard to get documentation of some of these historical events because some of them just rotted away. They're dust. You know,
So if you have an interest in Sybil, suppose you try to look her up, and the information just wasn't there because someone had thrown it out.
Took me 3 years to even make sense of her story.
Not talking about a fire, but just things had been thrown out or allowed to decompose or rot. So you do see more effort now to digitize records.
Right.
When I first got involved, this sounds funny in a way, it's historical, the big thing was to get microfilm. To get funding so you could microfilm records. I mean, it shows you how technology has changed. Well, now we know it's digital. And when digital has the other advantages, it can be accessed remotely. So people don't necessarily have to come to a specific library or archives.
Yeah.
So you're going to see a lot of changes in the information available.
I mean,
but this is what the history community has to cooperate and go to Albany and say, this is what we need.
Yep. A classic example.
Funding and laws and rules to make our job successful.
Classic example. When I was researching Sybil, like 20 years ago, information was not available.
Right.
Now, they've taken books and they've taken manuscripts and they've digitized them. And now what's happened, for example, it was believed that the first mention of Sybil's Ride was 1907.
Right.
However, when Martha Lamb did her book, The History of New York, we found out that the first mention was more like 1880. So things have changed and things are popping up that were never there before. And we have access. Now, unfortunately, what happens is people can't always connect these dots.
Right.
You know, important information shows up, but people say, you know, they read it and it doesn't mean anything to them.
You know, in 2011, we had the Putnam County History Conference. I will say I really helped initiate that here, and there hasn't been one since. But part of the value of that is to bring people together.
Yep.
Because we need to connect not just via email and other kinds of social media, but to meet in person, to talk. What are you working on? What are you doing? What records do you have? To share this information so people can cooperate and collaborate. Say, oh, you're doing that on your account? Well, we're doing something similar here. Maybe we can work something out together. What are you doing with your schools? Oh, here's what we're doing with our schools. So there's a need to bring people together.
Absolutely.
To talk to each other, to
Absolutely.
share what they're working on. The teachers, the municipal historians, the independent researchers. Now, you don't have a lot of historic sites compared to some other places, but you have some. And without that communication, everything falls through the cracks.
Yeah, that's why I have always admired what you try to do, working with teachers. Because when you're working with teachers, you're working with youth. You're working with young people who have hopefully a longer span of lifetime left to help uncover some of the wonderful things that unfortunately will be lost.
That reminds me of the time we were at one site and the teacher says, you know, I haven't been here since I was in 4th grade on a field trip.
Yep.
And in some way that shows, well, why didn't you ever go visit it as an adult?
Yeah.
Now, let me just give you an example. Cold Spring and Garrison are the two big draws, especially Cold Spring. The train stops and other things. There's a program coming up at Teaching Hudson Valley, it's a program at the Wallace Center, the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park, where as part of that 3-day conference, there are field trips in Cold Spring and Garrison.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because
Now, you could go to Cold Spring for roughly 9 to 5 or 9 to 3 and Garrison. The programs are simultaneous. But if you did one on a Saturday and one on a Sunday, suddenly you have spend a weekend in Putnam County.
right.
There's no reason why they couldn't take what they're doing on Saturday and on the same day, it's a Wednesday, I think, and have it as a weekend program where you spend the morning in Boscobel and Garrison, see Shakespeare in the afternoon and evening, and then the next day spend it in Cold Spring. Now you have a weekend here. The problem Putnam has with that is where would they stay overnight?
Yeah, there really are no hotels.
That was the problem.
No major hotels.
And that came up in the Regional Economic Development Council funding, the process whereby people ask for money for New York State every year. Was where would you stay here as a visitor? As a beyond some bed and breakfast, you don't have a whole lot. There's not a whole lot here. You can go to Danbury, you can go to Fishkill, you can go to White Plains,
I hear you.
but you can't stay here. So even if you put your weekend program together,
I know.
Where would the people stay?
I hosted the Luddington family.
Oh yes, I was there.
And we were in Danbury.
We were in Danbury, right? Yeah.
I mean, there were too many of them, and we had to have a place to stay. All right, Peter, unfortunately, we are down to like the last minute.
Really?
What can we leave? I know time goes by when you're
Time
having
goes
fun.
by, yeah.
Last minute words to our audience. What's coming up? What should they not miss?
What's coming up, as I mentioned, is this meeting we're going to have in Utica.
Yep.
We want to have everybody in the state get involved in at their own level.
Good.
Of creating an agenda to advocate for in Albany at the next legislative session.
Good.
And we are going to be asking people at some point in the fall to meet with your state legislators, to meet with your individual state assemblymen and state senators to say, here's what we need, here's what we want in the next assembly session. Now, as we develop that, then we'll get the word out to the community, and maybe you'll read that email.
There you go.
After all.
Well, what you have just heard is Peter's plea to you to understand that you not only need to be aware of what is, you need to be aware of what was, and you need to be aware of what should and will be. You are part of history, and you need to make history happen. And Peter, that is exactly what you do.
Thank you very much.
My compliments on all of your hard work. I know you spend day after day. I know that you get rough under the collar when people just are not listening. So listen. Remember, this is your history. These are the days of your life. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening to Peter, listening to his passions and his peeves. Thank you for joining us. We're going to have some wonderful guests still upcoming. In the meantime, a very special thanks to this guest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.